In the next couple of days, you'll receive an email with us with a link from the recording of this webinar and the links to the resources mentioned today. So, welcome to today's webinar. Today's webinar is about using questioning strategies to support EAL learners across international primary and secondary stages. Our speaker, Tom Beeks, a trainer at the Bell Foundation, will explore how questioning can be used effectively with plurilingual learners who are learning English within the context of a mainstream curriculum. So he'll look at how to check linguistic understanding and how to use questioning to extend and develop learners' language skills in a curricular context. During the webinar, please feel free to use the chat option to send any questions as they come to you, and I'll collect them and post them to Tom at the end. So with that, I'll hand over to Tom to take us through today's topic. So over to you, Tom.
Thank you very much, Emily. And yeah, big welcome to everyone. As always, it's lovely to see people joining us from all over the world. I think a lot of the things I'm going to talk about here are quite universal, but a lot of the ideas, things that I think have become quite common or popular in mainstream education here in the UK. And I'm sure some of you will have seen those things in your schools, but some of you may not. So hopefully there'll be something new for everybody here today. And this is what we're going to cover. So large part of today is looking at what effective questioning looks like and how we can adapt that for our core learners of English. We're going to look at strategies for checking the understanding of plurilingual learners, especially in terms of checking understanding of language and language structures, as well as understanding concepts and ideas that we're teaching within the curriculum. And we're going to explore as well how learners can respond effectively to questioning and how we can support them with that. And that's hopefully so that you're better able as an educator to choose and adapt the questioning strategies that you use so that all the learners in your lessons, regardless of English proficiency, are able to participate as much as possible in curricular learning. And yeah, to make sure that those learners are as involved, better able to contribute to questioning in the classroom. And this might feel like quite a trivial or narrow topic in some respects to be doing a whole webinar about, but I would argue that it's really quite foundational to effective teaching and learning, and also for inclusion and belonging. Because as we know, inclusion and belonging isn't something that you can bestow on your learners. It's not something we do to our learners, right? It can only come out of a sense of meaningful contribution to the group. And so learners feeling like they're able to contribute and that their contributions are valued is really critical. Questioning is a huge role, plays a huge role in that, in building that inclusive classroom culture. So today we're going to be, as always, looking at this very generic classroom issue through the filter of multilingualism, supporting our English language learners. Okay. So the first thing we're going to look at then is some of these features of effective questioning in multilingual contexts. But first, for everybody here, it wouldn't be a webinar about questioning without a question for you. So this is a little bit of an experiment. I've not tried this before in a webinar, but I'm going to try and establish a questioning routine for this webinar. What that means is I want to answer a question in the chat, but I want everyone to reveal their responses at the same time so we don't get distracted by that kind of drip, drip, drip of responses. So what I want you to do is, first of all, make sure the blue bar above the chat box is set to everyone. There should be a little blue box with a little arrow. If you click the arrow, make sure it's set to everyone so that everyone can see the response, not just hosts and panelists. Otherwise, only me and Emily see it. Then, when I reveal the question on the screen, write your response in the chat, but do not press enter until you see the magic wand. You'll see what I mean in a minute. So I'm going to give you about 30 seconds. time for this question. You can write as many ideas in your response as you wish, maybe separate them with a comma or a number, but don't press enter until you see the one. Okay, here's the question. Why do we ask questions in the classroom? Write your ideas. Okay. So as we can see, lots of people already putting their ideas, but if you were following the instructions, I'm going to show you the magic wand. And now everyone, you can put in your answers. Okay, wow, fantastic. So many great responses there. And I think we can see quite a few themes, can't we? So there's checking understanding, activating, checking comprehension, address misconceptions. Yeah, okay. So yeah, so there's plenty of shared themes for engagement. That's an interesting one. We'll talk about that a bit later. Okay. So thinking about this question then, I think you can categorize most of the questions teachers ask in the classroom into three areas. And the first of those is finding out what students already know, or maybe to remind them of something that they've previously learned, which people have mentioned. Maybe activate that prior knowledge. One of the things that everybody's mentioned, or most people, is checking understanding of something that's been newly learned. Obviously, that's kind of foundational to teaching and learning. And another reason might be to make students produce new ideas. So we see people writing things like getting people thinking, or generating engagement, and this is getting them to think of something, reflect, produce new ideas. Now, none of this is specific to multilingual learners, of course. It applies to everybody, but it's really important to have that clarity on the purpose behind the questions we are asking, so that we can adapt and optimize these strategies, which is what we're going to look at for the rest of the webinar. So we can categorize questioning strategies relating to operating in multilingual context into 4 stages. And I'll just briefly give you an overview of those, and then we'll look at them in more detail. So the first one is planning. This might involve considering the types of question we want to ask, how we're going to formulate the question, but also preparing or thinking about any scaffolds that might be needed. And we'll look at some of those a bit later. The next phase is the actual asking. So this is the practical and physical act of using the questions in the classroom, deciding who and to whom questions are posed, when they are asked, even the physical positioning of the teacher and their posture and their use of the body language or positioning when asking questions can be important as well. The next stage is supporting pupil responses, and this refers to the techniques we can employ to ensure learners are able to articulate a response effectively. This might be with pre-prepared scaffolds, or it could be with on-the-spot techniques. And lastly, the naming of this is a bit ambiguous, but responding, by that I mean how a teacher follows up or builds on a student's response to ensure deeper learning. So we're going to take each of these strategies in more detail and look at some practical examples and how they can be tailored or adapted for use with multilingual learners. So let's begin with our planning stage. And this speaks to the importance of designing questions to directly support your learning goals. So again, speaks to the importance of having very clear both curricular and language objectives, hopefully in your lesson plans or schemes of work. As people have mentioned, it's about establishing what learners already know, and considering which questions will help move forward learners' understanding of a topic. What are the questions that are going to help our language learners ensure they understand both the task and the curricular topic and the meaning of the key words that we'll be using in the lesson as well. And I think planning questions you're going to ask is really important, especially for teachers who are less experienced. But I think, as we gain more experience, often we're able to do this almost subconsciously without thinking about it, some of these processes. But I think most teachers would plan at least some questions in advance to structure that learning and to make sure we're checking understanding of the key elements of what we're teaching. So sequencing these questions then from building basic knowledge to expanding the thinking and language use. This might look like starting off by reminding them what they recently learned so that we can build on it. And then after we've introduced some new knowledge, we can then ask questions to ensure that learners have understood and to start expanding that thinking. So again, I'm talking here about a context where we're working in a curricular classroom, so not necessarily in a English language classroom, but in a lesson where they're learning both content and language at the same time. And of course, learners at the early stages of learning English might benefit from more questions establishing basic concepts at the beginning, the simple kind of who, what, where, and when. And that's going to allow them to access the vocabulary that they need to be able to make sense of the topic as it gets more complex. So that's the sequencing. It's also going to be really important to plan any resources needed to support comprehension. And again, we'll come to this later on. This is really critical for our language learners. But, examples are things like visuals, glossaries with simplified definitions or translations, providing written support. So having questions in writing on the board or screen as well as verbally. And it may be for new to English learners, providing translations as well when this is feasible. So let's get into the nitty-gritty stage, and this is the asking. And there's a lot of things to consider here when you start looking at it. But let's start by just considering how we ensure our language is as comprehensible as possible to the widest group of pupils, including our learners at the earlier stages of learning English. So here's an example of a teacher question. And hopefully we can agree this use of language is not ideal for our learners of English. It's very long. There are lots of clauses. There's an embedded clause in there. There's complex language structures, conditional. The key word, condensation, is hidden away right at the end of the sentence. So what's the alternative? Well, and the simplest thing we can do, and I'm sure those of you who are already EAL specialists will do this automatically, is that we simplify or grade our language to make sure our questions are comprehensive to as many learners as possible. So this means keeping the questions short, to the point, and adjusting the complexity of the language we use as much as possible without making it unnatural or ungrammatical. So rather than this example, we could just say something really simple, such as what is condensation, right? Don't need to overcomplicate it. And in fact, we don't even need to ask a question. Less is often more, right? You could simply just do something like condensation means, and then your learners complete the sentence. So it's definitely very possible to make our language much simpler as a starting point. Okay, we're going to do another chat task. So I'm just going to line in chat to show where last one. There we go. So type your answer to the question when it's field, and I'll give you again about a minute. Don't share your ideas in the chat until you see the magic one. The question is, how do you select who is going to answer a question? So, for example, you might ask students to put their hands up and choose a student. So you can write technique, or you could write your thinking process. I don't mind. You've got about a minute. Okay. So you can put your answers. Oh, interesting. So we've got people talk about random selection. Cold call is a term that's coming out a lot. Okay. Okay, someone said the higher levels first to model. You could specify who you want to answer pair work. All right, loads of brilliant ideas in there. Okay, and there isn't, necessarily right or wrong answers here. It's all very contextual, but I wanted to get a flavor of what people are doing. And what I'm going to do, sorry, I'm looking at all these ideas. What I'm going to do is just take some of the commonest methods that teachers use all around the world for selecting students, and then just highlight some of those advantages and disadvantages. So I guess perhaps the most basic technique we could use would be calling out, right? We ask a question and the learners just shout the answer out. I'm sure anyone who's been in a classroom for more than 5 minutes doesn't use this technique for fairly obvious reasons, right? We only hear from the learners who are comfortable shouting out, and it creates a lot of chaos and noise. So yeah, I don't think anyone's doing that one, although, I do sometimes still see it. The other possibility is, I guess, hands up, and that's perhaps traditionally what a lot of people think of as the method, don't they, for using questions in the classroom. But I think nowadays a lot of people are moving away from this, as is evidenced in the chat here, and that's because for certain kinds of questions, it's really not very helpful. So if we want to assess knowledge, if we want to check understanding or knowledge, then hands up is terrible for the obvious reason that the children who raise their hands are most likely to be the ones who already know the answer. And that's not really very helpful for a teacher understanding if everybody has understood something that they've taught. It might be useful, though, in other contexts. So, for example, when we want to generate new ideas or to get opinions or reflections or something like that, then, but there is a time and a place for hands up. But I think it's certainly becoming less popular here in the UK, I know. I'm not sure if that's the case in other places. So another thing that people have mentioned a lot in their responses is nomination. And of course, there are a lot of different ways we can do this. So we might choose to do it in sequence so that we can keep track of who has answered. But of course, that has quite a large drawback that learners know where they are in the sequence, and they tend to switch off as soon as they've had their turn, or when it isn't their turn, and so that can lead to a lot of disengagement. So then a lot of teachers prefer to use random nomination, and I think we've seen people mention some techniques in the chat here, like some people might use lolly sticks. Somebody's mentioned cards of destiny. I like that idea. I'm not sure if that is a random nomination or if it's something else, but yeah, the idea is that you can then choose learners at random, and so all the learners have to stay engaged because they're not sure if they're going to be called upon to answer. So it does keep them on their toes, but again, as soon as learners hear another child's name, they might switch off. So Jamal, what is condensation? And then everyone who's not Jamal stops listening after this point. And again, the engagement might fall away. So to avoid this then, we might try a different tweak to this, which is name-end questioning, which is what's often recommended here in the UK, I know in a lot of schools. So then we ask the question and the learner's name is attached to the end. And the idea is there that everyone needs to think of the answer, and then one child is called. And I think that's better. But again, I think we can also improve on this technique as well. So what might be a better method than randomly nominating? Well, one method could be to target your questioning, depending on the type of question you want to ask. This idea I've taken from Adam Boxer, who's a UK-based science teacher, I believe, and an education consultant. And he has a very useful blog which goes into loads of detail about this, which I'll share the link with later on. But if you want to check understanding of a concept or an idea from the curriculum, so this is not language necessarily, this is curricular knowledge, then what a teacher might do is assess in their class, who is the strongest in the subject area, and kind of divide them up into thirds, not literally, but just, mentally in their head. So let's say the subject is maths. You might divide your class into 3 groups in terms of their goodness at maths. I couldn't think of a better terminology. Didn't want to start using words like ability and things. So in this hypothetical example, let's imagine we've got a class full of learners. Navin is up there in the top third, and Jakub is down there in the bottom third. So if we want to get a sense of the likelihood that most learners in the class have understood, who should we ask? Would it be Navin or Jakub? You can type a one-word answer in the chat. If you were going to check understanding, which of these learners would you nominate? Okay, see some people. There isn't a wand for this one, everyone, so you can just go ace as a one-word response. Okay. At the moment, I'm seeing people sharing. Every single person has written Jakub, which I would agree. Yes, it would make more sense to ask Jakub, because if he understands, then there's a really good chance that the other 2/3 of learners in the classroom also understand. If he doesn't understand, then maybe we can choose someone from one of the other thirds to answer. And yeah, as somebody mentioned, for example, Navin might be the learner who could explain more or give a more complete answer, perhaps. So these learners in the bottom third are what we call, or what Adam Boxer calls, indicators. So when asking questions to check for understanding, asking an indicator is going to be more useful than just randomly nominating a child. And again, if you want to learn more about this concept, he's got a useful blog on that. He goes into a lot of detail. So what relevance does this have to our multilingual learners? Well, the main point I would make is that it's really important that we don't fall into that trap that just because an EAL learner may have a lower proficiency in English, it doesn't automatically make them an indicator. If you're checking for curricular knowledge, we need to have a good understanding of both their proficiency in English and their curricular knowledge as well. Of course, if you're checking understanding of a language-related question, then the learner's English proficiency is going to be more relevant, and that might inform your decision. And yeah, people have mentioned exactly, if Jakob doesn't know or remember, you could get somebody else to explain, and then he could repeat in his own words. Yeah, absolutely. Or he could even just repeat the words of another learner. Yeah, that's absolutely a useful technique. But the important thing is he gets a chance to respond, and even if he can't get it right, he again gets a chance to give a correct answer later in the process. So we've looked at this name end questioning and targeting as useful techniques when asking questions. But there is a drawback to all of these techniques because they all have their different advantages and disadvantages. And I guess the most obvious drawback of all of the things we've just spoken about is that in terms of participation, they're quite limited, right? We're limiting participation to one student, maybe if two or three, if we're bouncing the question around. Excuse me. So inherently, there's a limited assessment value. So what is the solution to mass participation? Again, there's probably more than one answer, but certainly one of the solutions that's become very popular in the UK over the last kind of 10, 15 years are mini whiteboards. And I'm sure many of you will have used these or have encountered these. And again, it's a topic, it could be the topic of an entire webinar, but the reason people love mini whiteboards is that everyone can participate. So in terms of assessing learning, it's quite a powerful tool. And we'll look a little bit more in later sections about where mini whiteboards might come in. But I've certainly seen them used very successfully with multilingual learners of all proficiencies. Obviously, once they've built up some foundational literacy. Okay, so let's move on to our stage 3, which is all about supporting our multilingual learners to respond effectively to our questions. And there are two key strategies to consider here. The first one is providing enough thinking time. And the second one is scaffolding the language that learners need to answer the question effectively. So providing them support with that. Okay, one more question. I'm sorry, it's a webinar about questioning. You're going to get lots of questions. This time, we're going to think about, this is a very short, simple question. So I'm only going to give you a short time to answer, but don't press enter until you see the magic wand. And the question is this: how long do teachers typically wait to nominate a learner after asking a question? This is like, I'm talking like in general, like on average, based on the research. How long do you think? Not how long for you personally, but how long on average? Okay. Ooh, this is fun. So we've got ranging from 1.5 is the lowest I've seen. Someone's put generally forgets to wait. Yeah, that would be me. And I think people have put 10 seconds, 10 to 15 seconds, 20 seconds. Wow, okay. So we've got quite a big range there. Well, apparently, according to research, or I think this research was done quite a long time ago, so maybe it's changed. But there was a sort of classic study, I think in the late 70s, and they found that teachers wait between 0.7 and 1.5 seconds before nominating a learner or before talking themselves. And what the research also shows is that by increasing that wait time up to just 3 seconds, we can really improve the quality and accuracy of the responses that we get. Dylan William, who's a very influential educator in the UK, describes the questioning process for teachers as plan, ask, stay quiet, or shut up, which I think is probably quite a good summary, if you want it, of what we've just been talking about. Plan, ask, stay quiet. And obviously, this is important for all learners, but it's really crucial for learners of English because, of course, processing that information in a second language and working out what to say in an additional language will take longer. So there's lots of ways that we can build in this wait time or this thinking time. And the simplest one is just to be quiet. I say simple, it's easy, it's very easy to say, but if you're a teacher like me, who tends to like the sound of their own voice, it can be a lot harder. You have to really work at it. So let's go back to our example of our name end questioning. What is condensation, Jamal? So looking again at that question, just have a reflection. You don't need to write anything in the chat. This is just to think about. At what point in the question do we build in the wait time? Question. Where would the wait time go? And hopefully you all kind of went, well, that's right. The wait time needs to go before we give the name, before we nominate the student. Otherwise, again, everyone's going to tune out. But of course, waiting or being silent isn't always a feasible strategy or a useful strategy because, you know, it can also lead to students getting quite disruptive or bored potentially. So we also need to look at other ways, building in thinking time. And so this is where our friends, the mini whiteboards, come in because they automatically build in thinking time as learners have to consider what they're going to write and they have to wait for everyone to complete. And then, you know, on the signal, 3, 2, 1, everyone shares their response. The idea being, again, a teacher at a glance can get a pretty good understanding very quickly that everyone is on the same page, or maybe they need to revisit the content or question if the responses are not what the teacher was expecting. Lots of people have mentioned this as well already. This idea of turning and talk or think, pair, share is a variation of this. There are lots of different ways that this gets talked about, but that's where a child would talk to the person next to them briefly, and then before sharing back or responding. Yeah, someone's put it out that too long wait time complicates the answer, but I imagine that's also true. But that comes about, I think that's to do with the choosing your questions carefully and making sure they're pitched at the right level for the learners. And certainly things like turn and talk and think, pair and share are not going to be very useful for all questions. I think they're going to be most successful questions that do require quite a lot of thinking and complex thought. And of course, for our multilingual learners, that discussion could potentially be in their home language if they happen to share, if you're teaching learners that share a home language, because if they can discuss it more fluently in more depth, they're more likely to give a better response before they translate that into English. This might be where translanguaging can be quite useful, but again, it will depend on the makeup of your class. There are other very simple techniques in primary with the younger learners. You know, pretend microphones are great. So, you know, the teacher has the microphone, asks the question, and then you can routinize this with your learners, but you can, you know, you can walk around the classroom and then you hand over the microphone to the child you want to answer the question. And that just, again, naturally builds in a bit of waiting time. Equally, you can do this as a turn and talk where they have microphones and they would say the question and then maybe ask their partner, and the partner repeats the question and asks it back. And if you can build that into a routine, it's quite an effective, simple way. nice. Helen's mentioned having answer buttons to record their answers. Oh, that's a cool idea. Yeah, I mean that's the thing. Technology now allows us a lot more options as well, doesn't it? Especially for like rehearsal of language, and not having the pressure of saying it out in front of everybody in the class. So yeah. And for older learners, you could allow them to take notes for responding. And again, that's something they could do in their home language if that is going to produce a better response, if that's something that's going to help that individual learner. Okay. So that's wait time. And now let's look at some of the ways that we can scaffold language. And again, none of these ideas, I imagine, will be unfamiliar to you if you've worked in an EAL context before, but it's worth remembering that these are options and making sure that all your colleagues are aware of these techniques because they're simple but effective. So using sentence frames and sentence starters. So that means providing a fragment of a phrase or a sentence that you want the learners to use, which they then complete. Here's an example from a primary maths lesson from one of the Bell Foundation's resources. So you can see here that the children have been provided with a starter. And of course, you might provide that on the screen or to the child as a word mat to help them during an activity where they need to use that language. Here's a more complex sentence starter from a resource, an English literature resource with the book A Woman in Black. And you can see here that the sentence starter, I did that because, and then there's an example sentence provided as well. And the slightly more sophisticated cousin, I suppose, of the sentence frame is the substitution table. And I love a good substitution table. And I think they can be really powerful ways to allow multilingual learners to produce longer, more detailed responses than they might otherwise be able to achieve. And they're also really good for familiarizing learners with the grammatical structures and word order in particular of English. And different grammatical patterns, and also extending vocabulary as well, because they're it's very easy to include lots of synonyms, for example, for different ways of saying things in a substitution table, and they're very easy to adjust as well to different language proficiencies. So this example is from a geography resource talking about glaciated landscapes, and you can see that the substitution table has been designed to allow learners to produce longer or shorter sentences according to their language proficiency. So it's possible to make a really simple sentence if you just use the kind of 1-star prompt. So we could say farming provides jobs. You could extend that using the 1- and 2-star prompts. Farming is good because it provides jobs. Or you could extend it even further by including the 3-star prompt. Farming is good for upland areas because it provides jobs. And so you can see how we can kind of build out these sentences. And it's a really useful way for learners to kind of be more confident with expanding their language. You'll also notice at the top there, we've got sentence frames or sentence prompts for asking the question. I think this is part of an interactive like barrier game or information sharing activity. So we have the questions that one partner will ask in the gray box, and then the responses in the substitution table. And there's also a box for other useful questions in the corner, so for more incidental language, which you will need when you're trying to share information with a partner. How do you spell that? Can you repeat the question, please? So this also providing this kind of incidental language when learners are talking is important. And again, for questioning, giving learners the confidence and making sure it's okay in your classroom to say, you say that again, please, or could you repeat that, or I didn't quite get that. Because if you have learners with lots of different varieties of English at different stages of proficiency, sometimes they aren't going to understand each other, and that's okay. That's just part of learning a language. It's messy and takes time to to build up your pronunciation and fluency. And it's always if you have students who struggle with confidence on pronunciation, it's always a good trick, isn't it, to get them to teach you some of their language, home language, and then listen to you butcher it and make a really horrible attempt. But it's important to show solidarity, isn't it? And lastly, we've already touched on this, but another strategy might be translanguaging and using home language again in the situation. If you're in a classroom where the learners share a home language, or you have groups of learners who share a home language, this is especially important where the questions, what's important is the content of the answer, not the grammatical accuracy of it. So if you're not in a language lesson, what's more important is that they are getting across the curricular ideas. So if they're able to discuss that in their home language first, it might give them an advantage. Of course, not always. If a child's been in international school since kindergarten, it may well be that they're a lot more comfortable discussing academic things in English than they are in their home language. Even if their home language is more fluent in the language that they use more with their friends and family. And again, yeah, this is the kind of strategy that might work better when you're trying to get new ideas and opinions from learners as opposed to assessing understanding. So we've talked about wait time and then also linguistic support. So by including both those elements, we're really increasing the chances our plurilingual learners of English can participate. So that brings us to the last stage, which we've labeled responding. But again, I'm referring here to the teacher building on and responding to learners' answers to the question. And again, all the strategies I'm going to talk about here are useful for everyone, but we might want to adapt some of them when using them with multilingual learners a little bit. So a common technique is, again, it goes by lots of different names, but things like stretch it, say it better, right is right, which is this idea that we promote high expectations. So when learners, we expect them to give a really accurate response, a full response, and we challenge them to maybe expand their answer or to say it better or to include more information, or we challenge them if they haven't got it quite right. And again, it's building a classroom culture of it's okay to be wrong. We're going to help you. That's why we're here. We're going to help you get it right. So again, in this kind of context, we're generally concerned with the content of the response in terms of the topic we're talking about. It's probably less important to worry about fluency, pronunciation, or grammatical accuracy, as long as that isn't completely obscuring what the learner is trying to say. However, if the learner's given you a brilliant response in terms of the curricular content, but that learner can do better in terms of their language, then absolutely we can ask them to stretch it and repeat it. Yeah, Tasman's just put a great thing in there. A useful phrase is right answer, wrong language. Say it better. Love it. Yeah, it's a really simple way of doing it. And again, like these kind of routines in the classroom, once students get used to it, are really important. And again, if you're an EAL specialist, this probably comes naturally to you, but for our curricular specialists or classroom teachers, it's something that they might need to be reminded of. So, just using techniques like, can you say that again and maybe this time use the past tense, or say that again, but, with a better word than nice, or, so they can use a synonym for something, for example. Another common technique is recasting. That's simply repeating the response back to the learner, but changing it and making it fuller. Again, with multilingual learners, we can recast with upgraded language that's appropriate to the learner. And then maybe we can ask them to repeat that back to us. Any other technique is, can be called bounce. I call it bounce. Again, one of these acronyms that I've come across is pose, as in ask the question, pose, pause, pounce, as in nominate, bounce. And that's the idea that you are then offering the question out to other learners to expand or improve on the answer. So again, this is where we're making use of our knowledge of the language proficiency in the classroom, because we could bounce the question to a learner who may struggle, because if we bounce the question to a learner who doesn't have the language proficiency, they're not going to produce an effective answer. So we can choose somebody perhaps who's stronger the language to produce a model answer, and then maybe come back to the original learner. And this could also be an opportunity to encourage translanguaging again, to promote fluency. So perhaps if you're in a context where all the learners share a home language, it's okay for them to drop into their home language for a word or phrase that they don't have as part of their response, just to keep the momentum going of their thinking. So normalizing that kind of activity can be useful in some contexts. And this idea of returning to the original student who answered a question incorrectly or incompletely to get a correct response is labeled looping by some educators. So again, by labeling it, I think it just makes it easier to talk about. And I think this is especially impactful for our language learners, because it's giving them the chance to repeat that key language and an upgraded language, even if perhaps they're not quite there yet in terms of producing it spontaneously. Okay, how are we doing for time? All right, we're doing all right. Okay. So we're going to move on to checking understanding and thinking about that from a linguistic perspective. And there are two acronyms here in this sign, ICQs and CCQs. And if any of you have done any English language teacher training in the past, you will have encountered these. But if you haven't, then ICQs stands for instruction checking questions. CCQs is concept checking questions. First of all, we'll come to this point about checking understanding. And that is that, as a rule of thumb, it's not very helpful to use this question. Do you understand? I'm going to illustrate this with some adorable pets, because why not? And that's because if you ask, do you understand? You could get the answer yes. And that could mean the learner has understood completely and correctly, which is what we want. Wonderful. You could get the answer yes, when the learner thinks they understand, but actually they haven't. We get the answer yes, when they've sort of understood some of it, but we don't know which part they've understood and which part they haven't understood. And we can get the answer yes, where the learner didn't understand anything, but doesn't want to admit it. And certainly, it's like me when I'm talking to someone in a foreign language, nod and smile and just hope that whatever they've said to me, it's okay to do that. So we have the same answer, but 4 completely different levels of actual understanding. Is what I want to get across. So, okay, hopefully I've convinced you asking, do you understand is unhelpful. And that means we need to use other kinds of questions. And this is where our checking questions come in. And normally they're quite short, closed questions that are linguistically simple to answer. So often they can be answered with one word or a short answer. And again, we can divide these into our instruction checking questions to make sure that learners know what to do before a task or activity, and concept checking questions where we're checking that they've understood the concept or idea being talked about, or the piece of vocabulary that you're using. So again, these terms are commonly used in language teaching, and they're useful for all learners, not just our multilingual learners. So here's some example of instruction checking questions. And again, I'm sure all teachers do this to some extent. They may not always kind of label them. So I'm not going to go into lots of detail there. But again, if we think about learners just take that little bit longer to process if they're listening in another language. Asking these questions is quite important, as is making sure your instructions are carefully scaffolded. Okay. And for the final couple of minutes, let's look at an example of concept checking questions, because these are more complicated and they will look different in different subject areas, but they're extremely important for checking the understanding of particularly vocabulary for our multilingual learners. And it's also something that's quite easy to do ineffectively, I think. So I'm going to give you a bit of a counter example. In this scenario, we're in a science lesson talking about voltage and circuits and things like that. And there's a paragraph which mentions a toaster, but there is no picture. So let's imagine that the academic vocabulary has been already taught, because it's kind of key vocabulary that's been covered in the lesson or in a previous lesson. The teacher knows the learner knows that vocabulary, but they're not sure if the learner is going to know the word toaster. And sure enough, one of our EAL learners asks, "What is a toaster?" And perhaps the teacher responds with a short explanation. Maybe the learner still looks a bit confused. So maybe we need to ask some questions here to check if the learner has sort of understood this explanation. And this is where I've seen teachers get themselves into all kinds of difficulties. So I'll ask you to reflect, how would you check the understanding of this word with the learner at the early acquisition stage? You don't have to write anything in the chat. You can have a think. And here's how you probably wouldn't do it, which is to bombard the learner with lots of these different kind of questions. Do we use it in the kitchen? Does it make the bread hot or cold? Do you use a toaster to make breakfast? This is something in English language teaching that teachers are often taught is better than just giving a definition. I think the idea is that you're sort of eliciting information from the learner, but I think often these can just cause confusion. Because if the learner knows the word, then the answers is going to seem really obvious, and they're just going to get confused. And if they don't know the word, then they're just a bit lost. So, it's really important to ask ourselves, does the learner know the concept? Are they going to be familiar with this idea in their home language? And if the answer is yes, then just keep it simple. We'll give them a visual or a direct translation. That's going to be much easier. This is a toaster, or toaster is, and give them the home language. Or if you don't have the home language, you ask another child who would be able to translate it. And again, visuals are your friend, right? And where possible, a visual is going to be far more useful than any kind of question. So just in terms of using concept checking questions, here are some questions just to help you think about doing it. Do you actually need a question to clarify the meaning of the word, or can you just use a visual? Is understanding this word critical to the task or the topic? If it's not, then probably ignore it. Are there any words that you get confused with, or how do you disambiguate? So toaster, toast, I don't know, what could cause confusion, I suppose. What are the key semantic features of the word? And again, I could do a week's worth of workshops talking about that. But what I mean by that is things like level of formality. Is it more academic? Is it more social? Is it specific to a particular subject area? Is it positive? Is it negative? If it's an adjective, is it kind of something you could use in any situation, or is it got a particular connotation? And how and when is an image typically used? Yeah, an image is worth 1,000 words, Alejandro's put in the chat, which is generally true, but I would just caution because some words are not easily shown with visuals, and that's where you do need to bring out the concept checking questions. So when we're starting to get into more abstract concepts and things like that. Okay, let's wrap up. And just some things to look out for when we're using questions. And I'm sure lots of these will already be familiar, but for the purposes of summarizing, Remember that questions in English can be structurally quite complicated compared to other languages. We do funny things with word order, and don't get me started about tag questions, which is when we tag a bit on the end. Like, we studied this last week, didn't we? That was interesting, wasn't it? And the tag has to agree with and in poor learners of English, you can understand they must be banging their heads. Whereas in a lot of languages, questions are just you say a sentence and you add a question particle on the end of it, and that's it. There's the obvious trap, which we touched on a little bit with the CCQs, which is one of the reasons students don't answer or think about questions is because they don't seem worth answering because they're just kind of obvious or rhetorical. So don't, ask too many obvious questions. They just kill the culture in the classroom of questioning and answering. Be careful with rephrasing and reformulating. I see teachers do this a lot with language learners, the AL students, where the student is processing, maybe hasn't understood completely, or is just processing, and then the teacher says the same question but rephrases it. And then that completely throws the learner because they're like, oh, they've suddenly got a completely new bit of language. And it might have been that actually often it's better just to repeat the question as you originally said it than it is to keep rephrasing it. Because, rephrasing is a really common strategy for fluent speakers of English, but it's not always the most useful thing. Unless, of course, you know that you phrased the question really badly or very long-windedly. And that's related to this sort of bait and switch idea, which is where you start asking one question and then you rephrase it, but actually you maybe add another bit to it, or you change the question because you're already thinking ahead or something. And again, that can be really confusing for everybody, but for our language learners especially. And as I've mentioned, overuse of simple questions can really be quite damaging in terms of engagement and willingness to listen. So try and be. Okay, I think that's all we have time for. And I don't know if there were any questions, Emily, that we didn't manage to cover.
Thanks, Tom.
Chat.
No, there didn't seem to be any questions in the chat, but that was a really interesting webinar. I think everyone will agree, and really great to have some reminders of some, and build on those. So, so thank you very much. And I just sort of wanted to say that that's going to bring us to the end of our webinar, and it will be the last one before the summer break. So we'll be running some more webinars in the autumn, so do keep an eye on our website, or you might want to join our mailing list. And we also offer online courses aimed at different roles, and early bird discounts are available for early bookings. So here's a little selection of the training that we have coming up at the end of this year. So assessing the language proficiency of learners, an EL coordinators course, and adaptive teaching as well. So those are available to book onto for next year. And just a quick reminder then that you'll get an email within 48 hours with a link to the video recording of this webinar and the links to the resources that were mentioned today by Tom. Thank you everybody for attending and joining us today. Thank you very much again to Tom for such an interesting webinar. And we look forward to seeing you again soon. So take care and enjoy the rest of your day, evening or night, wherever you are.
Thanks for joining, everyone.